Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings, that is Malachim Beis. We are in the middle of Perek Daled, that would be chapter 4. We just read of the miracle of oil that Elisha performed to save a widow from the terrible fate of losing her two children to slavery. And now we are going to read of another miracle which also is a mirror image of, with certain differences, of course, but a mirror image of a miracle that we read about Elisha's mentor, Elijah, back in chapter 17 of the first book of Kings. Now we're going to read another version of what happened in Elisha's life. And here we go, verse 8. Vayehi hayom, and it was on a particular day, Vaya'avor Elisha el Shunem, that Elisha went to the town of Shunem. He visited the town. Visham Isha Gedola, there was a great woman. Presumably this means regarding her wealth, or great in name, or great in prestige. Vatachazek bo le'echol lochem, and she pushed him, she urged him to eat a meal with her, by her. And it was that whenever he passed through that area, he would turn towards her place in order to eat food, to eat at her place. So she hosted him by giving him food, and thus showed her support for the prophet, and as he went about his work as a prophet. Vatomer Elisha, and she said to her husband, Hine no yadati ki ish Elohim kadoshu. I know that this man is a man of God. He's a holy man. Over aleinu tamed, and he's coming over to our place often. Naase no aliyat kir ketana. Let's make him a small room in our upstairs, in our in the upper floor of our home. V'nasim lo sham mita, let's put there for him a bed, v'shulchan, and a table, v'kisei, and a chair, u'menorah, and a lamp. V'haya, so let's set up a nice little guest suite for him. V'haya b'voho eleinu yasur shama, so that when he comes to us, he can go and sleep in that room. Let's not, until now we've been giving him food, let's give him a place to stay. Havahi ayom, and a particular another day came by. Vayavo shama, he came over to her place like he usually did. Vayasar el ha'aliyah, and he did, and of course they invited him upstairs. They showed him the room they set up. So Vayasar el ha'aliyah, he went up to his room. Vayishkav shama, and he rested and slept there. Vayomer el Gehazi na'aro, and he said to Gehazi, his servant, Kirola Shunam mitazos, call that woman, the woman from Shunam. Vayikrola, and he called her, Vatamod lefanav, and she stood before him. Vayomer lo, and he said to him, meaning, he said to, so in other words, to stand before, Gehazi. Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Emarna eleha, tell her. So he's speaking to this woman through Gehazi as a intermediary, and he says, please ask her. Hine choradet eleinu et kol hacharado hazos. You have choradet. I'm sorry, in the feminine choradet with a shiva under the taf. Was you you have troubled yourself, to do all of this trouble. You've went through so much you've bothered yourself, went out of your way to do all this for us, right? Melasos lach, what can we do for you? Hayesh ledaber loch el hamelech, would you like for us to speak on your behalf to the king? O el sar hatzava, or maybe to the general of the army or some other official. Maybe you have some business that they can help you with, or maybe you're in trouble of some sort and we can help you get out of the trouble. Vatomer, and she said, no, betoch ami anochi yoshaves, I live within my nation. Now, this means, I'm among my people. I have what I need. I don't have any problems. It seems, just from reading this verse, again, to give you the impression, and this we learned from the last story that we learned in the previous podcast as well, the story within which Elisha ended up performing a miracle to save the previous widow who was impoverished and indebted, gave us an impression of the type of society that they were living in, which was a society in which creditors would do things like that, and people were at risk of losing their children to slavery if they couldn't pay back a debt. Not the kind of community that the Torah calls for when it tells you, Lo sia lo kinoshe, don't be like a noshe, right? And it chose the language of noshe, a creditor, but not just a creditor, but one who is aggressive in collecting his debt. But not one who fills the ideal society of the Torah, or one has specific pity on a widow rather than the awful practice of taking her children away. And here too, we get the sense from this verse too, because first of all, he says, you went through all this trouble. Do we need to speak to the king? One gets a sense, well, maybe she's in trouble with the king, right? Maybe the general is after her for something, right? So maybe we can speak to you to get you out of trouble. And then her answer, Betoch ami anochi yoshavas, sounds like within my nation. In other words, I live among my people. I don't have any run-ins with the authorities. Again, you get the sense that the authorities are an evil, bad force, which is always the sign of a corrupt society when the authorities are evil and corrupt. So this was her answer. I'm satisfied with my lot. I have what I need. I don't need anything. I'm fine. Vayomer, and then he said to Gehazi, right? This is Elisha speaking to Gehazi. Now that this was her response. Umela asosla. What can we do for her? Right? We should do something, something to thank her for all of this. Vayomer Gehazi, and Gehazi said, Avol bein ein la. She does not have a son. V'isha zakein, and her husband is elderly. So it's unlikely that that the natural course of events will lead to a child. Vayomer, so he said, Kirala, call her, Vayikrala, and he called her, Vata'amod ba'pasach, and she stood in the doorway. Vayomer, and he said to her, Lamoed hazeh, ko'es chaya, at choveket bein. At this time of year, at this season, you will be hugging and holding a child. Vatomer al Adoni ish Elohim, ha-Elohim. She said, no, my master, man of God, al tichazev b'shivchasecha, do not lie, do not fool, do not trick your servant, your maidservant. In other words, she could not imagine such a thing. Don't lie to me. This is not gonna happen. In other words, rather than saying thank you, here we have a woman who had already accepted her fate. And Gehazi assumed that this was something that she wanted, and Elisha then went ahead and gave her the blessing. Now, of course, Vatahar Aisha, the next verse, 17, Vateled Bain, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son, Lamoed Hazeh Koes Chaya, at this time of year, at the season, Asher Diber Eleha Elisha, just as Elisha had spoken to her. So here we have another miracle. Elisha blesses a woman who was childless before, and then a year later, she has a child just as he had predicted. Now, it's important to note that this is not a child that this woman had asked for, right? This is just a child who Gehazi decided she needed, right? So that's going to have some repercussions. Anyway, as we go on to verse 18, Vayigdal Hayeled, the boy young grew up, Vayihi Hayom, and it wasn't a certain day, Vayetzei El Aviv El HaKotzerim, and he went out to his father who was with the people harvesting in the field. Vayomer El Aviv Roshi Roshi, and he cried to his father, my head. He had a horrific headache. Vayomer Lanar, and he said to one of his boys, one of his assistants, So'eu Elimo, carry him back to his mother. He's obviously, something's wrong. Vayisa'eu Vayavi'eu Elimo, and he carried him and brought him back to his mother. Vayeshev al Birkeha, and he lay down or rested on her on her lap ad hatzorayim until the evening vayamos, and he passed away. Vatal vatashkiveo al mitasish Elohim, and she brought him up and put him down on the bed of the man of God, on the prophet's bed, in his room that they had set up for him. She laid him down on the bed. Vatisgor ba'ado vatetzeh, and then she closed the door of the room where he was, and she left the room. So at this point, she maintained her composure, apparently did not tell anyone what had happened, and except this is what her reaction was. Vatikra Elisha, she called out to her husband, Vatomer, Shilchana li echad min ha'na'arim, send me one of the boys, one of your servants, v'achas ha'asonos, and one of the she donkeys, v'arutza ad hisha Elohim v'yashuva, and I can go and run to the prophet, and I'll be back. I need an assistant to go with me. I need a donkey to ride on. Vayomer, and he said, Madua at holechas elav hayom, why are you going to him today? Lo chodesh v'lo Shabbos. And it's not the first of the month. It's not the Sabbath, right? Those are days when people would go to the prophet, apparently, presumably to learn, to study, to hear teachings of God. But this is not one of those days. This is a regular work day. I'm out in the fields working. Why are you running to the prophet today? What's going on? Vatomer, and she said, Shalom. It's fine. Shalom, it's peaceful. It's fine. Don't worry. It's basically what she answered. Don't worry about it. So here she's not revealing why she's going. Again, she is apparently hoping for a miracle, which may be the reason why she placed him in just the bed alone, hoping the bed alone might make the miracle happen, but that didn't seem to happen yet. And she wants it to remain private. She does not want this miracle to be a public spectacle. So Vatachvosha Ason, she goes and saddles up the donkey. Vatomer el Na'ara, and she says to the boy that's assisting her, Nahag volech, go and go quickly. Atatzar li lirkov, don't slow me down. Ki imamarti lach, unless I tell you. In other words, let's hurry, let's rush, let's go fast. Don't slow down the donkey. Don't let the donkey rest too much. Vatelach vatavo isha Elisha Elohim el Har Carmel, and she went and eventually made it to the prophet who was at the time on Mount Carmel. Vayihikir os ish Elohim osami neged, and was when the prophet saw her coming opposite. She was approaching him. Vayomer el Gehazi na'aro, and he said to Gehazi, his assistant, Hinei hashunam misalos, here is that woman from Shunam, the woman who we stay by our house, the woman who gives us food, the woman who we blessed her with a child. Ata, now rutz na likrasa, run and greet her. Ve'emar la hashalom lach, hashalom li sheikh, hashalom la yoled. Is everything okay? Are things going okay with you? Are things going okay with your husband? Are things going okay with your child? Vatomer, and she said, Shalom, everything is fine. Fascinating way of answering by starting by saying everything is fine. It's kind of like when you meet someone in the street and you say, how's it going? You say, oh, everything's great. But if you sit down and talk, everything's not so great, So then they went and started a more deeper conversation, which occurs in the next verse. Vatavo Elisha Elohim elahar. So even though when Gehazi greeted her, quickly like that out, as she was coming, she said, Shalom, it's fine. But when she finally reached the Isha Elohim, the prophet, on the mountain, Vatachazek perhaglov, she grabbed his feet. Vayigash Gehazi lohadfa. And Gehazi approached to push her away, like this is inappropriate. What are you grabbing his feet? So he went to start pushing her away. Vayomer Isha Elohim, and the man of God, meaning Elisha, the prophet, said, Harpei la ki nafsha marala. Leave her alone, because it's apparent that she is very upset about something. She is in a lot of pain, emotional pain. V'Adonai ha'elimi meni. God held this back from me. V'lo higidli. I didn't know. Whatever it is that's paining her, God did not tell me. So I don't know what's wrong, but something is obviously very wrong. Vatomer, and she says, Hasha'alti vein me'es adoni. Did I ask for a son from my master? Halo amarti lo tashlosi. I told you, didn't I tell you not to trick me? Vayomer legechazi. So this obvious. In other words, something is clearly wrong with her son. And Elisha got the message right away. And there is some message in here that Elisha the prophet was not told by God, did not discern, did not understand what it was that was bothering her, what was wrong, right? And remember that when Elisha gave her this blessing and this miracle happened, this was something that Elisha decided to do on his own. It was not something that God told him to do, and it's not something that she even asked for. Vayomer leGehazi, and he said to Gehazi, Chagor masnecha, gird up your belt, right? V'kach mishanti v'yadcha, and take my mishenet, my cane, my staff, the one that I lean upon, in your hand, v'olech, and go. Ki simtza ish lo tivarchenu. But if you meet someone on the road, if you pass by someone, don't even stop to say hello, meaning don't bless him, meaning don't stop and say, Shalom Aleichem, how are you doing? And run real fast, and if a person comes and blesses you, or in other words, a person comes and says, how are you doing? Don't answer him and engage in conversation. And place this staff upon the face of the boy. Vatomer Eim Hanar. But the mother of the boy answered, Chai Adonai v'chei nafshecha im ezveka. By God, as God lives and as you live, I shall not leave your side. In other words, I'm not going with your student. I'm here with you. You're the one that brought this about. You're the one that's going to fix it. So vayakam vayelech achareh. Because she said this, Elisha listened to her and got up and followed her. So v'gechazi avar lifnehem, but Gehazi had already started the path, so he was ahead of them. So he reached the destination first. Vayosem es hamishenes al pnei anar, and he put the cane or the staff on the nar's face. Ve'en kol ve'en keshav, and there is no voice. In other words, no sound. The boy didn't speak. There was no response. He did not listen. In other words, when he was stimulated, he did not respond. Vayoshav likraso vayagad lo leimor lo hekitz hanar. So then he turned back and he told Elisha, who was following behind, the boy did not wake up. In other words, the staff did not accomplish anything. So Vayavo Elisha haboisa v'nei hanar meis mushkav al mita. So Elisha came to the house, and behold, the boy was dead, and he was lying upon the bed. Vayavo vayiskar adelet bad shneim vayispalel Adonai. So he comes into the room, he closes the door behind them, so it's just he and the boy in the room, vayispalel, and he prays to God. Vayal vayishkav al yeled, and he climbs onto the bed, and he lies on top of the boy, vayasem piv al piv, and he places his mouth on his mouth, ve'enav al enav, and his eyes on his eyes, ve'kapav al kapav, and his hands on the boy's hands, vayigar halav vayacham masari aled. And vayigar is like he leaned or he bent over the boy, and the boy's flesh began to warm up and come back to life. Vayashav vayelech bebayit achatena v'achatena, and he went up, back and around. In other words, he walked back and forth in the house, in the room. In other words, but once this direction, once that direction, and then he got up and he went again on top of the boy and bent over the boy. Vayizorer hanar ad sheva pa'amim, and as he did that, the boy sneezed 7 times. Vayifkach hanar et einav, and he opened his eyes. So he performed some form of CPR, and the boy cleared up whatever was blocking him from breathing, and he wakes up, and here he is. Vayikral Gehazi, and he called to Gehazi, Vayomer, and he says, Kiroel Ashunamit Hazos, call the woman from Shunam. Vayikroel, and he called her, Vatovo Elav, and she came to her, Vayomer Sivanech, here, carry your son out. Vatovo Vatipol al Raglo, Vatishtachu Arto, Vatiso Espino Vatetse. And she came and fell at his feet, at the feet of the prophet. She bowed to the ground, and carried her son and left the room. This was the story of the of bringing this boy back to life, which is a very similar story to when Elijah also brought the boy back to life, back in the first book of Kings. Here again, we see the tremendous amount of kindness and concern that Elisha had for this woman. But noticeably, there's again this miracle, which is obviously an incredible miracle, was very private, number one, and it was also a miracle that was done for a woman who had done him a favor, which kind of qualifies it a little bit. Just like the story before was a miracle done of oil for a member of his club, so to speak, one of the Bnei Nevi'im, this was a miracle done for a woman that was done in response to a favor that she had done for him. And one wonders that this reciprocity might be the reason why Elisha might have not been told by God of the child's death, which Elisha sensed, and we got a sense that he was concerned about that. Why didn't I know? He had a feeling that maybe God was sending him some kind of message that these aren't necessarily the types of miracles that you should be performing only for the people who do you favors. But we're going to see in the next miracle, we're going to see another miracle in the next installment, in the next podcast on chapter 4. Again, a similar kind of theme that passes through all of these miracles. That kind of, it's wonderful, it's astounding. We see the kindness and concern that Elisha has for people in terrible distress, but we also see that it's somehow not reaching the people, it's not reaching the public at large, and it's not influencing the terrible society within which they live. And here you have, again, another story which highlighted the cruelty and the injustice of the society within which Elisha lived. Should he have taken a different path? Who knows? Let's see as we study the works of his life. Thank you so much for studying this part of chapter 4 together. Looking forward to finishing this chapter together and, of course, studying the rest of this book. Have a wonderful day.